we have my friend Shahid Buttar on, and I want to make this point because she said, it was like, do we really even have civil liberties? I was floating this question to right wingers because there was a story that just came out how you had someone who was that good guy with the gun that right wingers always talk about. He was killed. He killed an active shooter, and then the cops came and killed him because he thought he was an active shooter, and that justified because he had the gun. So my question I was proposing to them rhetorically, I know we getting right into it, Shahid, but I was asking right wingers, I'm like, do we have gun rights or not? Because cops kill people even though they're innocent, and they say, oh, we were justified in killing them because they have a gun on them.
I got a 2-word proof for you. Philando Castile.
Oh, expand on that. Expand on that.
Philando Castile was killed in Minnesota. He had a gun permit, and they shot him in his car.
Wow. It was, so I wasn't that well read on that story.
Yeah, it was just one of the litany when we say their names, and we're called out names. Every time I'm at a rally, we call out names, and we keep adding names to the list. And his was one, I think it would have been 2018, maybe 2019. And I think in Minneapolis, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, he was the same city as George Floyd. Maybe the last prolific police shooting in that city before him. And Philando Castile had a gun permit. He was perfectly licensed to carry. And his wife live streamed him bleeding out in his car as she was trying to get him to a hospital. I mean, incredibly tragic. And I'm reminded, we just celebrated what would have been the birthday of Tamir Rice, I think, over the weekend. 12-year-old shot in a park in Cleveland within seconds of officers getting out of their car. No, we don't have civil liberties. And anybody who thinks that police keep us safe are basically burying their heads in the sand and refusing to acknowledge the evidence after evidence of case after case of innocent people being gunned down in the streets. And it amazes me. Today, the San Francisco Chronicle had the audacity to run above the page, above the fold on the front page, a story giving the Oakland police chief a megaphone to hit back at the police, at the city council, for just restricting the police budget over the weekend. Or late last week, Oakland made the decision, first of its kind in the country, to move $18 million from its police budget into better alternatives to actually promote community safety. And journalists in the city are giving the police chief the platform to punch back. It's appalling to me, this idea that, frankly, and I'll use Dr. King's terms, the white moderate refuses to acknowledge the reality that reveals itself time after time. And that is simply the police don't keep us safe. They keep property safe.
Yep.
There's a vast distinction between the two missions.
Yeah, and once again, I have a fun time talking to conservatives. That's why they don't. I love talking to them because I love pointing out their hypocrisy. And now I come at it from a view of libertarian socialists, anarchists. So I always tell people I believe in government that justify themselves. Like if you have government, you got to justify itself. So what does that actually mean? So I am supportive of Medicare for All, for example. Because Medicare for All is a program that inherently justifies itself. Because it saves 68,000 lives per year, it boosts the economy, it boosts wages, and it saves average people money. So that justifies itself. If we talking about universal basic income, to me that justifies itself. Because that will boost the economy, get money back into workers' hands so they can invest into businesses in their local community, spur economic growth.
Not to dance on the head of a pin, but as long as it's still got Medicare for All and the other stuff with it. Yes.
Yeah, I always framed this issue this way because I got into a lot of argument with Yang Gang people who I honestly believe my good friend Mark used to be a Yang supporter and he was one of the people that listened. I think a lot of people had good intentions at first and then they kind of fell into hero worship. So instead of evolving on issues, they rather double down and defend Yang. Because I'm like, okay, UBI is a good idea, but you don't have to run the UBI the way he wanted to run it.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the original architect. Oh, sorry, was somebody going to say?
No, go ahead, Shahid. You can finish.
Just the original architect of UBI was Milton Friedman, right-wing economist from the University of Chicago, and he proposed it. He articulates this. There's a book he wrote, Liberty and Capitalism, I think is the name of the book. And he says people should have the freedom to fail. So he sees UBI as a way of just offloading people and like society washing its hands of people who need services. And, it was a very vicious version of UBI. Dr. King, when he supported UBI, he had a very different vision of it. And people should be committed to visions and principles and policies, not people and personalities. I think of that as frankly, a problem in our democracy writ large.
Yeah, that's like celebrity worship and getting attached to the person instead of policy is a giant issue. Because I had a lot of Yang supporters confused because I'm attacking him from the left on UBI. I used to like yang UBI trash and like, you don't support you. I'm like, no, I do. His implementation of UBI is trash because I kept asking them. They were like, oh, we don't support Bernie because he support a federal job guarantee instead of UBI. And my response is like, why not both? Like I've seen people that say, oh, we should increase the minimum wage. We should have a UBI. I'm like, tell me why we shouldn't have both when we just gave our military $780 billion. We gave billionaires trillions of dollars throughout the course of this pandemic. We got corporate bailout after corporate bailout. But you guys don't think we can afford minimum wage and UBI and healthcare?
And I mean, the corollary is that they're too timid to ask for all of it. And it's like, why are we negotiating against ourselves?
Like, why are we negotiating in the class war? Do you have anything you want to add to that, Finney?
Yeah, I just really want to piggyback off the points that both you were making about the police and their overreaching scope. So, the police need legitimacy. Like, if they weren't doing all these little odd jobs that they keep absorbing from other places, I mean, what really would they be other than slave overseers that I mentioned, still fear and protect the top 1%? Like, seriously, like if they weren't out here catching dogs or writing tickets or doing any of those things that they've been tasked to do, what exactly would the job of the police be? Because they don't really solve crimes. They don't keep us safe. 53% of violent crime goes unreported whatsoever. And where do you think most of that crime goes unreported? Probably in areas that they're not over policing people. So it's just the whole argument about what the police do and what they don't do. Like I said before, I'll say it again. The safest communities do not have more police. They have more resources. They have more programs. They have more opportunities. So if we're asking for a decrease in police funding, and it's a justifiable decrease, and it's a human rights issue at the end of the day. Like, it's a human rights issue at the end of the day. Like, we need to eliminate the police altogether, and we need to eliminate prisons as well. So, I really want to piggyback off of that, and also talk about the fact that a part of decreasing the police force and divesting from police violence is investing in things like healthcare that is based in anti-racism and equity. So like a big part of divesting from police budgets is really just creating community safety that's actually sustainable, and it does not look like what we have going on right now in this country. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Right on.
Yeah, and this is why what you just laid out there is exactly why it's a road abolition. We're gonna have 10 demands on next week. We did have on schedule today, but we rescheduled to next week because we.
I talked to Awkward like 2 hours ago. I was supposed to say what's up from it too. Yeah, we just
love that dude. Love that dude.
Yeah, good,
I wanted the co-founders of 10 demand. That way people need to understand that it's a road abolition, because once we actually defund the police and once we actually start allocating resources to housing, healthcare, education, the crime rate will go down significantly, and it's been shown in society after society after society. So then once we realize that at that point you'd have police just standing around doing nothing, then the people would be like, okay, why are they even there? We could spend that resources somewhere else. That's the path to abolition. So there's all a lie where you have conservatives say, oh, they just want to just get rid of everything. Like, bro, there's a path that we can follow to get there, and that path is 100% reasonable. We outline that on 10 demands. And we all have a system. It's the path to abolition. And once people realize, like, okay, these cops are not doing anything to keep me safe. Once people had the material goods taken care of, like, once again, people are not gangbanging for the fun of it. Like, people are doing it out of material goods. That's why you had the corporate establishment is freaking out. They're like, oh, there's a crime wave going on right now. That's because our government abandoned us. Like, in our economy.
Crime is a socioeconomic problem. Like, crime is a socioeconomic problem.
Yeah, and I want to share.
Poverty drives it. There's no question. Just two thoughts here. First of all, right on to everything you all are saying. When we talk about this idea of the road to abolition, it's the difference between framing defund the police as a thing that some people think we want to do immediately, and the idea of an iterative process to shift from predatory, paramilitary, armed to the teeth, lethal justice towards both restorative justice and dealing with the upstream precursors that drive crime, like poverty, like crises, like the things that people are forced to grapple with. I think about this particularly through the lens of the intersection of abandoning services for people who have mental illness and need services, and then the idea that police are the people responding to them. Why are we responding to people who need care with people who can't tell the difference between a taser and a gun. Why do they have guns in the first place? That's what social workers are for, right? We have people who are trained for this. Let's pay them to do the work that they're trained for instead of putting people armed to the teeth who, and I think this speaks to the point that Effendi was raising, cops really don't do a lot of investigating. Why don't they go do that? That's what they're supposed to do, right? Let's focus them on their core mission. If public safety is supposed to be the thing they're about, let's just take everything off the table. You don't need armed people to do traffic enforcement. You don't need armed people to do, frankly, most of the things that cops do. So let's just give those jobs to people who don't have guns and let the cops do the things that they're supposed to do. And I think over time, especially to your point, Nick, when you were talking about how when we get people housing, when we get people opportunities, when we get people, alternatives, this is a bit of a sharp digression, but when we speak of alternatives and the way that the drug war in particular was constructed, I have a really hard time not just naming Gary Webb and the CIA's role in creating the market opportunity in the 90s. A generation of people were sent into prison where they were legally enslaved because the CIA ran drugs into US cities, creating market opportunities in places where they had long been denied. And this was all admitted eventually after the journalist who exposed it died of a suicide of 2 gunshot wounds to the head.
Of course. And
the ongoing criminality of an agency that has never paid a price. Mm-hmm. This is after they armed Al-Qaeda and before they started drone striking people. Okay, this is the moment in the CIA's long-standing corrupt cycle of criminality. And then they started torturing some folks, to paraphrase our last president. And this cycle is important to recognize, because when we talk about criminal justice and we talk about the war on our communities, we have to pin the tail on the donkey or the elephant or the agency. It's not just poverty driving crime and people ending up. I mean, this was engineered. There were agencies that created these problems. And it's why we have paramilitarized police in this country, because drug traffickers armed and trained by the CIA started killing cops. And instead of doing anything about the agency, we just put 2.5 million Black and brown people in prison. And, it's just a reflection of the corruption and the sordid criminality and the unwillingness to grapple with history that our country suffers from.
Yeah, I just want to make one point. Abolition is about dismantling the root of violence that is the state, that is the police state, that is incarceration, that is our overblown military and the violence that we perpetuate in other countries. When we work, we get where we're going by working to get there, by actually doing the work to dismantle these systems. And it's very frustrating when I hear people say that these things aren't possible, because it's not that it's not possible, it's just that it's unimaginable. We haven't seen a world in this lifetime, in these past couple of centuries, really, without, capitalism, without police, without that military, without that constant conflict and that violence. So what does it look like when we actually care for each other? What does it look like when our government actually cares for us? What does it look like when we put funding towards things that actually protect us sustainably and not for just a short amount of time? And what does it look like when America minds its motherfucking business and stops fucking disrupting, fucking administrations that they don't agree with across the world? What does it look like when we're not funding genocides and spending, during the Iraq war, we spent up to $10 billion a month bombing Iraq for no reason, when we could have been spending that on caring for our citizens. Our infrastructure is crumbling. And these are the things we're spending our money on. So it's just...
Are you implying that our government should lead other governments alone and spend resources on our own people? You far leftists.
I'll go back to your original question, Effendi. What would our government do if we weren't destabilizing other countries? What would be the point? What else is there to do?
America would be broke. Let's be very real. This is very tangential, but this is just something I wanted to touch on, especially since you're here, Shahid. If America and all of the colonizing ass countries that helped America, created America, and all of this fucking mess that we're in right now, if they really started to repair and reparate all of the countries that they actually destroyed, all these countries would be broke. There would be no American empire. America would be done. France would be done. Britain would be done. We owe so many people, so many different groups of people, so many different things, for so many different harms that we perpetuated against them, for our own greed, for just the fact that we think that human life is less important than our capital is, than our growth is, than our property is. And we just keep, conflating these things with our freedom. people being free in their countries does not infringe on our freedom.
That's right.
Us not stealing from other countries does not infringe on our freedom. Like it's not that hard to connect. But it's just like these politicians, especially politicians like Joe Biden, like Barack Obama, like Trump, even, and like, you know, George Bush, they're not going to say that shit. They're not going to say that it's our fault that we're in a lot of the problems that we are in, that we're in like all this debt. A lot of it, I probably is just fucking made up as far as I'm concerned. You know, like all zeros in the computer, because y'all keep finding money to give to corporations, to give to the military. It keeps, for some reason, the pockets are always open for that. So that means the money is somewhere.
Mm-hmm. No, I feel you're absolutely on. I mean, when we're talking about this idea about the harms we've perpetuated, the hard part, frankly, is like trying to unravel it all. I mean, just to be clear, the Pentagon can't even clear an audit. They can't even figure out what they do with the money we hurled at. $21 trillion went missing in the last generation. $21 trillion went missing. How does that happen? I wonder. It might just be that the whole thing is a scam. Is that possible? I mean, there's a weapon system called the F-35 that has no strategic rationale. It's redundant already relative to Chinese aerial surveillance detection methods. It will cost over $1.5 trillion over its life cycle. It was ridden by failures during the testing process, as it was derided by a Navy official as procurement malpractice. And we don't have money for Medicare for all. $1.5 trillion for a fighter plane that can't serve any conceivable purpose certainly isn't going to keep anybody alive. Right. And when we think about this like imperial extraction paradigm, you know, and I think you really elegantly named it when you talk about the government bailing out corporations to fund the Pentagon so they can steal more resources from other places to drive the whole cycle. You know, when we talk about our freedoms and other countries' freedoms, what our freedoms are, when George Bush was talking about it, at least, it's not our freedoms they're talking about. And it's not our freedoms that the Defense Department defends. It's the pocketbooks of Wall Street. That's what other people's freedom offends. And that's what the Pentagon is there for. That's what our military industrial resource extraction ecocide complex is there for. And we in the United States ultimately pay a price when we allow our own dogs off the leash. And ecocide is a perfect example of that, right? The wars for plunder that we keep effectuating from Iraq to, you know, Biden just bombed Iran, right? In the last 2 days, like this pattern is not just isolated to the war and human rights context. I mean, what do these countries have that we want? Why did we topple the democratically elected government of Iran in 1953 to install a puppet dictator and then inspired a right-wing revolution? It was for the oil. That's what we do these things for. So like connecting the climate crisis to the military industrial complex is a crucial piece. I mean, I think of this as Dr. King's legacy, because when he described racism and militarism and capitalism as intersecting, he was naming all of the ingredients of the soup. I don't think he necessarily saw the climate crisis as its embodiment, but he was naming each of the threads in the rope that we have basically allowed to, you know, threaten to hang our entire civilization. And that's where we are standing now, because we ignored and vilified and, you know, ultimately somebody assassinated, you know, the visionary who saw this coming, instead of us being willing to heed his remarks. And, you know, we construct monuments and reduce his words to, you know, slogans and bleed them dry of their significance. But I actually think this is the poignance of his ultimate legacy that I don't think even his fans don't at all give him credit for.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we want to highlight here, because a lot of people forget that MLK was a staunch anti-imperialist. He was an anti-capitalist, and
that's I remember why they killed it.
Yes, exactly. And people asked me. I remember I was doing a video, and someone asked, like, "What does it mean to be a leftist?" And I'm like, that's a wide philosophy for the most part. But to me, I think it starts at anti-capitalist, anti-imperialism. Like, I feel like if you're not there, you're a center left lib at best. If you're not anti-capitalist, if you're not anti-imperialist, that's how far I would.
Can we get real with that for a minute, if I may? Because what you're describing now is like huge part of the white left.
Yes.
Are imperialists who want free healthcare. I was set on fire. I was the target of a character assassination by people who thought their claims were justified because I was making the political mistake of not following their advice to focus on housing, because I, as a person of color, was more concerned about authoritarianism. And like the depths of this myopia are deeper even than I could construct. I mean, like the way that white supremacy rides its back outright, even within supposedly leftist spaces, is beyond disturbing. I mean, it's a threat, frankly, to the movement that remains unaddressed.
And that's something that we push back against. And a lot of people don't like me when I do it, but I gotta preach my truth. because there is a white bourgeoisie privileged left, and I noticed that they focus on stuff that's completely different than what we focus on. Because I love that you brought up, and I feel like Finney's ready, because Finney, I know Finney can talk about this all day.
Oh, I want to hear.
But I want to hear. Trust me, this is exactly why I want to bring Finney on today. But I will pass it to Finney after this, because I love what you mentioned when you tied the military and climate change together. And this is a point I cannot emphasize enough. And this is why I was losing my mind. At the end of the day, I think if you want, whoever you want to vote, not that big a deal to me, whoever you want to vote for. I just don't like when people lie. You know what I mean? Like, if you voting for Biden because you had Trump derangement syndrome, if you want to see Trump leave, you had a personal vendetta against him, fight your struggle, BB. I'm not mad at you. What upsets me is when people say stuff like, we got to vote for Joe Biden and if we want to stand for climate change. It's like, that doesn't make sense. Like, you bullshitting me. That's when you lose me. Not when you say, we got to defeat Trump. I disagree, but I'm not going to get mad at you. I get mad when people say, we got to support Joe Biden for climate change. So Joe Biden's increasing the military budget. You guys know that a story broke this year that the military is actively poisoning the black community. Mm-hmm. So
that's been happening in San Francisco for decades.
Yeah. So to be clear, just like you said, Shahid, this has been happening, but we just got enough confirmed reports. So you can only imagine the actual scale of this. And there's no accountability. It's literally, they're doing it with impunity. And they they dump in toxic chemicals, and guess what they dumping it? Disenfranchised community, mostly black, because they don't have the legal avenue to fight this. So, and then take that and consider the fact that the U.S. military is the largest polluter in human history. In human history, you can't be serious about fighting climate change unless you're proposing to cut the military budget. And this is a moderate solution by at least 50%. The Green Party will run down 70%. And people are like, oh, like this is why I like Angela Walker, because Angela Walker used to be like, I dare you to ask me about it. You know what I mean? So like progressive, like a lot of them and that run, and obviously you got a lot of experience with this. They almost afraid of having that fight. You know what I mean? But they like, I'm not. This is not me criticizing Bernie, not at all. But he proposed a 10% military decrease because he's trying to shift it over to winter. I don't think he went far enough on that. But they're not criticism. I'm not gonna attack him for that. But the point is, you should be proposing these giant military budget decreases, and then when they ask you like, what 50% military budget decrease? Explain why, and that what Angela Walker would do. He's like, I want someone to ask me about that. So if you're serious about climate change, you have to be serious about cutting the military. That's why I love that you brought that up, and because we want to connect all these issues. Now, the white privileged left, it seems like their primary goal is to save a little bit of money on healthcare. If that. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
I have thoughts here, but if any, I want to hear yours.
Yeah. So we do Finney first, then Shahid. Cause my issue, and I'm gonna say it like this, because I stand in solidarity with as many disenfranchised communities as I possibly can. I mean, I'm standing in solidarity with indigenous people. I'm trying to stand in solidarity with my Muslim brothers and sisters.
That's because you're a Fred Hampton leftist.
Yeah, Fred Hampton leftist. Latino brothers and sisters. So when I see a Democratic Party, for example, also stand in solidarity with Palestinian people. Like when I see them funding apartheid states, when I see them funding ICE, which is that use slave labor, that force feed, that sexually assault people, I can't, in my conscience, vote for that. So there are people, and this is for good reason. If you ask me, would I vote for someone who's against gay marriage? The answer would be 100% no. If you ask a liberal, would they support someone who is against gay marriage? Their question would probably be no. Their answer would probably be no now.
That's now. I just want to make clear. In 2004, when I was fighting these cases, there was not a Democrat in the country who stood with us. And I want to make this sharp, because Nancy Pelosi relies on the gay community here to put her in office, but Pelosi didn't support gay marriage. When I was fighting in court as a Muslim immigrant for the rights of my gay neighbors because of the same point. I'm a Fred Hampton leftist, right?
Yeah.
10 years before the Speaker of the House, with all the power and privilege, finally showed up on the eve of a decision by a conservative court that we had the occasion to celebrate the anniversary of over the weekend. But this idea of people getting credit for work that they never showed up for is sort of like part of, I think, this confusion. And I wouldn't say we're talking here about different confusions among different populations. I'm talking more about the confusion among liberals, whereas I think you're talking about the confusion among like self-declared white socialists. But yeah, I do want to hear if any thoughts.
Yeah, we're gonna get into plenty of roasting Nancy Pelosi. Trust me.
I have a story. I have a story for you about Nancy.
Trust me, we'll get to that.
I will definitely get into roasting Nancy Pelosi. But I just wanted to say this, like, my problem with the white left, and I'm not going to name names. Leah's not going to try to, but if I get angry, they might come out. So please.
Speak your truth.
But no, the problem that I have with the white left is the fact that they don't really acknowledge race in a lot of these issues in this movement. And they don't really acknowledge that, you know, yes, class struggle is the most important part and it does need to be talked about, but it needs to intersect with race. Because when you look at a lot of these, you know, issues that we are fighting for, when we look at, you know, a lot of the intersections of oppression, Black people, Indigenous people in this country feel that shit the most. So if you have a platform in which you are spending all of your time fucking doing, like, talking about pointless drama or beefing about shit that really at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, does not matter, then you are not doing your job. You are like, we are in a time where culture and politics is like, just, they are intertwined so hard right now. And like culture influences politics, not the other way around. So if you are out here influencing culture, then you need to like talk about these things from a real critical way of this government. Like, you know, when you talk about the labor movement, talk about how Black people have been disproportionately left out of labor movements, and that it's important to build labor movements so that way we can also build the Black working build the Black working class, build a Black middle class, and build these important, you know, and build this important generational wealth for Black people. When we talk about healthcare, Black women die 3 times more on fucking delivery tables than white women, but you never ever fucking hear these white leftists talk about that shit. You never hear them talk about climate change as being a fucking racial issue, because a lot of these fucking coastal cities that have Black and Indigenous people that inhabit them, all these islands that are going to get swallowed up by the fucking ocean, when mass climate migration happens, these people are going to deal with so much xenophobia and racism because we are not doing the things right that we can right now to protect our fucking planet, let alone dismantle racism in our fucking country. We are not centering anti-racism. And these fucking white leftists are definitely not centering anti-racism. And I feel like because they are so fucking pressed about keeping their privilege, that they actually refuse to dismantle white supremacy, because they're making a lot of fucking money off of this shit. And at
I've seen white leftists use white supremacy.
Literally. Like, and I'm not gonna sacrifice my principles to defend the squad. I'm not gonna sacrifice my humanity to defend the squad. And it's not divisive for me to demand my humanity as a Black lesbian woman in this country. It's not divisive for me to hold my comrades accountable who say that they care about this movement, who say that they have a sense of urgency. Well, I have a real sense of urgency because my people are dying. 6 Black trans women in DC have died this year already. So we have real issues.
Are these cop shootings you're talking about, or just
no? Like these are just like they're being killed by transphobic violence in DC. Like these are things that we really need to talk about and dismantle. We need to dismantle the root. And if you're not talking about truly dismantling the roots of violence in these communities, if you're not talking about, you know, the disparities of resources, if you're not genuinely highlighting, redlining every single time you talk about gentrification or voter rolls or anything like that, talk about the disenfranchisement of Black people. Talk about how we need reparations, not only for slavery, but for every single irreparable harm since slavery, Jim Crow, the fucking destruction of Black Wall Street, and many other fucking Black utopias in this country. So let's talk about all of that. Let's talk about all the white supremacist violence. Let's talk about all of that. Let's talk about talk about the fact that police brutality is still tearing through our fucking community. We need reparations for that. Educational disparities, we need reparations for that. Georgetown sold slaves to save the university. Y'all need to give every Black person free 4-year tuition. We need reparations for that. Like, for real. And white leftists do not focus on the right things. And that's the reason why a lot of Black people do not feel like a lot of these movements apply to them. And it's not fair because they don't platform Black leftists. They don't platform Black communists. They don't platform people that are living and breathing this shit. They don't platform activists, but they fucking condemn us. They condemn us for violence. How do you condemn oppressed people for fighting back against violence? What is the fucking proportionate response to fucking dying? What is it? What is the proportional response to layers upon layers of white supremacist violence that has been perpetuated in this country? What is the fucking response? You let me know. When your kids aren't fucking safe, when there are Black women that have been sterilized by this country and by these governments, you let me know. what the fucking proportional response to that is. And that is the reason why I'm just so tired of the white left. It has nothing to do with all the other bullshit that people are talking about, misogyny and all the other stuff. Like, yes, those things are important, but at the end of the day, like, you're still perpetuating violence, and you are upholding a system in which my people that look like me, and even myself, I'm in fucking danger. We are in danger, and we are literally screaming for help. And y'all have decided that your money and your notoriety and your popularity and your accessibility to people with power is more important than our lives. So that's my fucking problem with white leftists.
Speak it.
I'm about to say, don't get finished started on this.
God.
That's exactly
no, that was powerful. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Can I follow your guidance there? Because you were just talking about the need to talk about it and talk about the intersections. And I want to share 3 here, because there were a couple of different dynamics that came up that we have examples of here in SF that, just since we're talking about it, I want to put on the table. One, you talked about the theft of Black wealth. That happened right here in America's most proudly progressive city. The Fillmore was the West Coast jazz mecca, and it was destroyed in an urban renewal project in the 70s and 80s that raised hundreds of homes that were owned by Black families. And the neighborhood it's still theoretically there, but it's been effectively dismantled. And it was, straight out of the Tulsa massacre. I mean, different effectuation. It wasn't violent, but it was economically violent. It was structural violence, even if it wasn't, burning crosses. And similarly, before that, Nick was talking about the recent disclosure about the U.S. military poisoning minority neighborhoods. And here in San Francisco, the last 2 Black neighborhoods that remain, Bayview and the Hunters Point, after the destruction of the Fillmore, it's really the only places left in San Francisco where there are substantial Black communities, and they were poisoned by the U.S. Navy for 50 years. The bombs that we dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima were the only country in the history of humanity to use weapons of mass destruction to kill hundreds of thousands of unarmed civilians at once. The bombs that we built to do that poisoned the last Black neighborhoods in San Francisco, where the radiation levels not only sent the asthma rates and the breast cancer rates through the roof, but just to get super sharp about this, Nancy Pelosi engineered a land privatization deal. There has now been thousands of housing units built on land where the purchasers have to sign covenants not to grow vegetables out of the ground because it's radioactive. And how this all, in America's most proudly progressive city is where both the theft of Black wealth in the Fillmore and the military poisoning of our Black neighborhoods happen. And these examples that, people talk about sometimes, barely ever. I mean, we have the most powerful member of Congress representing this city in Washington, and nothing has been done for any of those communities. There's a lawsuit now with thousands of residents. They have cops, active duty and retired, joining the lawsuit to sue the Navy, to sue the contractors, because the whole thing is just a cluster. And the idea that power gets away with this serial criminality, and to get back to Afeni's point, that our supposed allies aren't there. This also takes me, I think, about Dr. King also, when he talks about the absence of our allies being the disappointing thing that leads us into this mess, right? Like, we expect the intransigence of our enemies, right? The GOP, the Wall Street, like, of course, we would expect them to be doing whatever they're doing. But when you have, and we would expect corporate Democrats maybe to be doing what they're doing, but when you talk about white people who describe themselves as leftists and don't understand these intersections, or who play into long established patterns of white supremacy because they're too ignorant to look in the mirror or examine the context in which they find themselves operating, that's also the story here in San Francisco. And I don't want to dive into it too much. I'm happy to if you want to, but I've seen leftist spaces be much more than merely absent when it comes to race. I mean, I've seen them actively.
I would love to hear your spin on that. Absolutely.
I mean, I was the target of a character assassination by white self-described socialists who were using tactics straight out of the Jim Crow South. I was accused in writing of sexual assault by people who admitted that it was a mistake when anybody asked about it 2 months later. And this was in the middle of an election when the press, every journalist in San Francisco suppressed the whistleblowers, who include women of color, who to this day remain not just outraged, but one of them's actually writing her own story now. And if the accusations toward me weren't racist, the silencing the whistleblowers were. And these were patterns straight out of white supremacy. If you consider racism as not just about race, but also about power and capital, they all intersect, right? It's the political motivations of false accusations render them no less racist right? If you falsely accuse somebody of sexual misconduct for political purposes, that is as racist as burning a cross on a lawn. And that's exactly what happened across every supposedly left organization in San Francisco in broad daylight, witnessed by hundreds of thousands of people in the middle of an election. I mean, this was an attack on an election by political operatives using white supremacist tactics to promote their political patrons who describe themselves as progressives and leftists, just to be clear. Yeah, I mean, it's so sordid. And, you know, in spite of all that, I still won 81,000 votes against the most powerful voice in Congress. It's 30% more votes than anyone's ever won against her. And I did that despite a racist character assassination campaign. So, you know, I come out of it, frankly, bloodied, but I am quite emboldened. And, you know, I ran to defend democracy against a corrupt set of intelligence agencies and a corrupt, powerful plutocrat. I'm not going to shrink from the corruption of a local political establishment. And, you know, my critics who thought I might have another thing coming.
Was you about to say something else, Finney?
I say absolutely. Like, I just, you know, and, you know, it's just, it's crazy because even now we're dealing with like the whole talk about infiltration, about the importance of security and like how mistakes can't be made. But white leftists are like often actively participate in the dismantling of our movements, of the co-opting of our language. And then you tell us to hurry up and wait. But it's just like, again, like, why do you continue to force yourself to be the front of my movement? The working class intersection that you had, you lose it because you start to make all this capital. You lose your sense of urgency. You lose your sense of connection to the people that you said that you were fighting for. And it's honestly a slap in the face to people that were actually supporting you. I supported a lot of these outlets. I supported a lot of these people. I gave my money to these people, to these candidates that they told me to support. These same candidates that feel like it's okay to vote present on raising the Capitol Police budget.
Yeah.
These same, and we're not even holding them accountable, and they're not holding themselves accountable to being wrong about you needing to be aggressive, like force the vote and all of these things, like all these different aggressive tactics. These are tactics out of Republican Tea Party playbook. Like that is what these are. It is about being aggressive. It is about fighting for the things that you say that you care about, because working class people are dying. Black working class people are dying. And at the end of the day, it's just like, are we going to think about collective safety? Yes or no? Are we going to advocate for collective safety? Yes or no? Well, then that means that you have to have the same sense of urgency that the most marginalized people among us do. And a lot of people are in fucking danger in this country if you are not rich and white at the same fucking time. So I'm not going to continue to entertain the arguments that, you know, it is divisive to call people out for not being urgent enough in their assistance to Black and brown people, to Black and indigenous people, especially because, you know, we have an indigenous woman that is the face of, you know, I can't remember the agency right at the top of my head. We have an indigenous woman who's supposed to represent
Interior.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Interior, Deb Haaland at Interior.
Oh yeah, Interior, yes. So yeah, Deb Haaland, you know, runs Interior, this representation for indigenous people, but 1 out of 10 indigenous women go missing and nothing happens. So what are we doing about that? Yes, we have the representation. Yes, we have that figure, this figurehead there. But what are we doing to actually materially protect these people? And also educate our people, our masses, our youth on who these people are, what their cultures are, how this country was built. Like, what are we doing to really pay homage and respect to these people other than propping up some upper middle fucking class or some probably super rich, wealthy indigenous woman who has a proximity to power? What does that do? What exactly does that do? And if we cannot hold people accountable to these fucking, like, honestly, like performative measures of protection, performative measures of love and policy, if we cannot hold these people accountable, then what the fuck are we here for? If we're not here to make our lives materially better and hold our government accountable, then what the fuck are we here for?
Period.
I'm so tired. I am.
I'm loving the discussion that you guys are having on this, and I want to give my take on this, and I think I can explain it. My frustration with the white left in a very solid example. I do want to ask. I know we didn't talk much about how much time do you have, Shahid? I want to be.
I'm good.
Are you good? Because I'm still the roast. We still the roast Nancy Pelosi.
We'll get there.
But I told you on my show we use. Okay, so there we go. We should be back. My internet just flickered for a second. We should be back live. The point I was making before that panic I just had. We still live though. Yeah, the stream should be coming up here any moment. Okay, so we had a massive protest, and then the activists on the ground, we had a demand. The demand, not an ask, was defund the police. That was the demand of grassroots activists. That was the demand of the community that had been killed by the police. In the summer, and I admit this, defund the police wasn't a popular opinion on the massive political discourse, right? 538 did analysis that showed that defund the police was minus 35 in approval. Wow, we got a one hell of a hill to climb, don't we? So this is not new. This what I just described, because do you guys know the bus sit-ins in the 60s was widely unpopular.
Right.
The civil rights movement was widely unpopular. So this is when my disillusionment started, because I saw people, once again, like Afeni said, I watched a lot of these people. I have respect for a lot of these people. I like Crystal Ball, but she was like, defund the police is kind of I don't know, that's not a good slogan. I think we should be more calculated. It's not a slogan, it's a policy demand. So I saw white leftists after white leftists. Once again, I like Crystal, but this is just a giant flaw that I've seen now popular white commentators and people who claim to be in our support. So you took something that was started by the grassroots, by black people, by Latinos, indigenous people, and then you morph what we was asking for, like, oh, we got to ask for police reforms, ignoring the fact that the Minneapolis Police Department reformed their police 5 years before Derek Chauvin was killed. So I had my channel. I was starting out then. Only been political commentary for about a year and a half now. And I like, okay, I'm taking up the mantle of this issue, because this is an issue we are 100% in the right in. Because as I explained before, as a libertarian socialist, you cannot properly explain to me the benefit of massive bloated police budgets, especially when that budget is used to fund an institution that has always been racist, that's always been about uplifting white supremacy and doing the bidding of the ruling class. But you know what a lot of the white left did? They ducked this fight. You had a lot of people that was like, oh yeah, I like the tenets, I like what they're saying on defund, but I think they need to be more practical and more realistic.
They always want to be more strategic.
Yeah, you guys realize that them saying that hurts us.
Yes.
Not saying we support you wholeheartedly. That hurts our movement, because they were like, oh, see, even progressives won't be on board on this ask. Now, what happened since then? I not ran for no reason. Ever since defunding police started, it started out massively unpopular, and 538 did a poll, which every corporate news media outlet covered, because that one showed them massively underwater. You know what they did not tell you in that same poll? Because they had Al Sharpton, he was on CNN. He was like, oh, defund the police, the black community don't want this. This is a bunch of bourgeoisie white people that are demanding this. That didn't make sense at face value. At face value, that didn't make sense. But that was what the black bourgeoisie and that was the liberal class tried out. It was a movement supported by white people. The 538 poll that they used to attack defund the police, it showed that there were two people that supported it: black people and the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party voters, I mean. And the voters supported it only because it was boosted by support from black people, Latinos, and indigenous people. And if you look at the white community, even among liberals, massive disapproval. So they stay silent on this issue. But meanwhile, the grassroots activists chip away. I release video after video, tweet after tweet. The Feeney's on the ground, like literally yelling at the police. We showed that clip earlier. Literally yelling at the police. And the big bloated police budget propaganda gets destroyed over the course of a year. And I'm going to pull this up because apparently people forgot. Because I'm seeing people now saying the defund the police movement is dead. That, oh, the American people heard it out. And
we just defunded in Oakland. $18 million just got shifted last week. That's huge.
Yeah, so that it's propaganda for 1,000 different reasons. But my audience show, I'm going to share screen so you guys see it. But I covered this on my show. This was after the election. And notice that the media did not cover this. They were super excited to cover the polls where defund was underwater. But a majority of voters, and this is when they asked in exit polls, a majority of voters who want to reallocate the funds from the local police budget to crime prevention initiatives, such as counseling, drug treatment, job training, and education, including 55 percent of independent or third party voters. So what they just described was defund the police. That went from negative 35 to now we are leading with independence. Now, Shahid, anyone, what policy have you guys ever seen jump like this in the span of 1 year? This is because the black leftist activists that didn't give up on this. Yes. And now what I'm seeing, and I've been reporting on this, the same white bourgeoisie leftists that was afraid to talk about this issue, now that they see it become more popular, now all of a sudden they want to talk about it. You see what they did?
Talk about this shit before budget season.
So
you should have talked about it before budget season.
Yeah,
it's too late now.
So that was my long-winded example to show you guys why I'm frustrated. Because I can talk about, there's a lot of issues I can do this with. You know what I mean? A lot of issues. But you see how they waited until the public started shifting to care about this black issue? Meanwhile,
you know what it reminds me of? Yeah. No, I don't want to steal your after when you're done.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring you right in, Shahid. But you guys see what happened there, right? So black activists like me and Afeni was doing work on this while it was unpopular. Then the second the needle started to move, then all of a sudden white progressives are talking about it now. You see what it is? They don't want to take the hard fights. They don't want to take the hard stances. And I thought that what Bernie Sanders told us. Like, I got a lot of issues with Bernie, but he told us to take unpopular position and fight for it. Look how quick the white left forgot about that. What are you about to say, Shahid?
Same pattern played out in Ferguson 7 years ago. A community rose up after centuries, frankly, of deference by white organizations and escalated this struggle, made the intersection of restrictions on dissent, police militarization, and the white supremacy implicit in policing front page news for the first time, frankly, ever. And the activists on the ground, if you talk to anybody, I mean, Corey was part of that community before she went to Congress. That community didn't see any resources. All kinds of national organizations started getting grants for all kinds of things. Not a dime of that found its way to Ferguson. And most of it was not aligned with the community's demands. It got channeled into this reformist sensibility, which is why, you know, we found ourselves watching Eric Garner die on tape saying, "I can't breathe." And then nothing happened in response to that. And then we find ourselves, you know, with yet another person in George. And like the recurrence of these, not incidents, that's too charitable, murders, but, you know, he even described it as murder as charitable because it's a pattern, right? That's a war on a community, and it's been going on too damn long. And the idea that people don't connect the dots between these incidents, even when the dots are staring them in the face, and you have thousands of people around the country clamoring, saying, this is what we demand, as you put it. I love your point about defunding not being a slogan. Everybody who reduces it to a slogan needs to read King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Yes. And they need to look in the mirror and realize it was being written to them. And the poignance of that particular document in this day and age, I find just cannot possibly be overstated, because I think, you know, a lot of what we're trotting on right here is a, unfortunately, not recent theme. You know, this is the challenge that our movements have faced in this country going back for generations. And we're very much not only standing on the shoulders of other people, but we're unfortunately getting tripped by the very same dynamics.
Yeah. And go ahead, Finny.
I'm gonna say it's just very frustrating because, you know, like, I really just feel like you should not be going to Congress to make a career out of it. Like, I just don't feel like public service should be a lifelong career. I like, there should be more working class people, like everyday Americans like you and I, that go there. There should be more Black people, more Black trans people, more Black non-binary people, more Indigenous people that go there and make these policies, because we cannot continue to have people that don't actually represent us writing policy for us. Policy in this country dictates everything that you do. You walk outside, you cross the street, that's a policy. Like all these things are dictated by policy. So if my humanity is dictated by policy and my oppressors are the ones that are writing this legislation, and they are the ones that are making my life harder. They're the ones that are putting more money into national organizations that, you know, will support their democratic agenda or support whatever agenda that they're trying to push. Then, you know, I have a problem with that personally, because it's just, I'm tired of Black lives and Black ideas being, you know, traded over every 4 years just because, you know, they want to push out this push this big narrative to vote, but you're not giving us anything to make our lives materially better. If AOC said that she'd rather be a one-term congressperson and actually stand on her principles and fight for her shit, then why the fuck isn't she doing that? Like, we need to push the limit. We need to push it to the brink. And I'm not I have my problems with Noam Chomsky as far as the Democratic Party is concerned. But he says that a revolution is a series of reforms. We have to keep pushing the system until it breaks. And if you're not willing to do those little pushes to even get there, to even do that structural change, then what are you really there for? Like, we have to be brave because so many people are relying on these policies. So many people are relying on this legislation for their humanity. And that's why there are so many people that are in this country that don't believe that politics is going to fucking save them. That's why there's so many Black people that say that you cannot get our liberation through master's tools, because time and time again, when we organize, when we give our labor, when we give our time and all these things, we get shit on every time. Because I know, me personally, I protested for 200 some days last year. I organized, I did mutual aid. We feed people every week. Where the fuck is our big national grant? Where's Freedom Fighters' big national grant at? We didn't get that, but Black Lives Matter did. $1 million organization. The fucking leader of Black Lives Matter, Patrice Keller, is buying fucking $1 million compounds. But Samira Rice, the mother of Tamir Rice, whose 19th birthday just passed this past Friday, by the way, she's homeless in some instances over these past couple of years. So if she's unhoused, but y'all are making millions of dollars, then where the fuck is the priority at? And it's just like all of these different things, all these different people that say they're a part of our movement, especially white leftists, especially people that have proximity to power, people like the Squad that aren't actually using their leverage and their power to get the things that we want. At what point do we get to hold y'all accountable without it being divisive? Without it being us not caring about, the democracy and all these other things. At what point does it get to that? When I just simply do not agree with you. And I should be allowed to say that. And if you don't agree with Nancy Pelosi, if you don't agree with the establishment, then you need to fucking say that. Because we didn't send you there to agree. We sent you there to literally disagree and disrupt and dismantle violence for our communities. Not to fall in line. And here, time and time again, we see that they're falling in line. We can't have this shit anymore because this shit is unacceptable. This is not the type of system that you fall in line for.
I want to piggyback.
Yeah, preach. Finney, go ahead, Shahid. I don't know if Shahid got disconnected. I'll give him a few moments.
Am I back yet?
Yeah, you back. I can hear you.
All right. I just wanted to add to what Finney was saying, just a reflection on both the moment when the Squad did go along to get along and got nothing for it, and then a place where they challenge. Well, one of them, Ilhan. I want to separate Ilhan from the rest of the Squad because I think a lot of people criticize the Squad for not showing up, and she does frankly show up a lot of times, when the rest of them don't. But I just want to point out that when that whole movement is kind of a day late and a dollar short, because the point when we had Pelosi most vulnerable was not in December. It was in November. I had her on the ballot for the first time in 30 years. And I wondered often where all the people who, got really fired up about and forced the vote, like where they had been before. Because, in any case, when we drill down on that moment, one of the people who ultimately decided not to try to force the vote and voted for Pelosi to serve as the speaker was, somebody I hope to join in Congress, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, who ultimately got denied a committee assignment to Energy and Commerce that would have been her opportunity to develop the Green New Deal. So going along doesn't get you anything. The establishment
Katie Porter got removed from the Financial Services Committee. So what did y'all get?
Right. Not very much. And it's the difference between conciliating power that concedes nothing without a demand and demanding to get some concessions. And when I look at in the context of, just to note a sort of like inverse example, then Ilhan 2 weeks ago comes out and very thoughtfully, reasonably, entirely legitimately says that we should respect the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, that all victims of state violence deserve justice. And the entire Democratic leadership unites to condemn her, call her offensive, demand clarification. All she said was that we should respect the international laws that we fought a world war to establish. And what didn't go observed by a single journalist in the entire country, as far as I could tell, and this drives me insane because it's not just the corruption it indicates institutionally, it indicates corruption individually, and it also indicates
Come back. There you go.
CIA call. Did I skip out again?
Yeah, you cut out just a little bit, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, so what not a single reporter noticed was that back in 2006, Pelosi got briefed on what the CIA euphemistically called enhanced interrogation techniques. And instead of investigating, as we are required under international law to do, this is a requirement that we not only fought a world war to establish, but sent a Supreme Court justice to prosecute the Nuremberg trials and establish this rule. If you cover up torture, that's a crime like the torture itself. And there's no justification. It's liability up and down the chain of command. Wow. In other words, if we did ever acknowledge the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction, not only would the entire leadership of the CIA potentially face justice in The Hague, so would Nancy Pelosi. So you have a powerful, wealthy figure in Congress, wealthy white woman, punching down at a Black Muslim woman in Congress for speaking the truth, while her individual conflict of interest, and not just like money conflict of interest, like keep your ass out of jail kind of conflict of interest, goes completely unreported. And it's, the corruption of punching down and left is one thing, but suffice it to say problematic.
It is. We missed that like the last few seconds of what you said there, but I think I get the gist of what you're saying there, and this kind of transition into our next point. I definitely want to talk about this with you, Shahid, because the media complicity around Pelosi and the Democratic Party in general is straight out frightening. Like, people always want to talk about state TV. Like, there's no media conglomerate that as loyal to the ruling class as the U.S. media, period. And like, once again, that's something that most people don't even know, that you had Nancy Pelosi that was complicit in torture and war crimes, and they decided not to go after George Bush. And it's very telling that she was condemning Ilhan for what she said, and what Ilhan was saying was very, very moderate because she still kind of played the both sides game, because, I mean, Hamas got every right to defend herself because Israel is a colonizing army. And if you had someone that was trying to steal United States land, no one would be like, oh, I can't believe America's launching bombs at them. Like, of course, that's their response. So a true leftist response is that Hamas and Palestine 100% have a right to defend themselves because it's their land and Israel is the occupying force. Now, once again, imagine if I was a congressman. They really would have lost their shit. Ilhan just said that, the United States and Israel does bad stuff too, which is beyond. Once again, they're not criticism of Ilhan, but that's beyond weak. They're not. Once again, I'm not criticizing Ilhan, but this is generally a weak statement, because what I would say is the United States is the biggest exporter of terrorism. Period. They're the number one threat to world peace, as voted by multiple countries in the world. But like you said, Nancy Pelosi was condemning Ilhan for saying something that's extremely mild on that's something that I would say is not even remotely controversial. But I tell you, where Nancy Pelosi and her allegiance lies. And I want to get your thoughts on this, Shahid, because while the whole forced to vote thing was going on, I had a slightly different take than a lot of people at the very beginning, because my take in the beginning was we shouldn't vote for Nancy Pelosi, period, for speaker.
At all.
Because she's one of the most corrupt people in the world, period. Because Justice Democrats started as an anti-corruption organization. We both challenge corruption. Like, you had, and I would love to hear you expand on this, Shahid. You had Nancy Pelosi literally taking Paycheck Protection Program money. Like, you had her literally taking corporate bailout for her husband. She literally complicit with getting corporate bailouts done. She never found awards that she didn't love. Complicit with torture. That alone, like, okay, we can't vote for her. Like, she was allowing people to starve in the pandemic so she can score political points on Donald Trump instead of getting people the aid they need.
Right.
That alone should be enough for us to not vote for Nancy Pelosi, and that should be enough for the left to rally behind anyone that want to get rid of her, because she is as bad as it gets. And the squad thing that they're gonna get Nancy Pelosi on their side. There's a story, and this kind of just show how soft corruption works. And so when I say the squad been corrupted by the Democratic Party, people are like, oh, what? That's harsh. I'm not saying, like, there are different levels of corruption. Like, people are like, oh, just because I say the squad was corrupted by Nancy Pelosi. I'm not saying they're Joe Manchin. You know what I mean? But corruption can happen at a human level, meaning that if I get to know someone, I'll be more likely to take it easy on them when I become see them as a friend, for example. So when Bernie Sanders was standing in front of millions and millions of people on the debate stage on a crucial moment for the left, when he says that Joe Biden is his good friend, I believe him. Because there's no doubt in my mind that if you're in the Senate and Joe Biden sees you as an equal, because if you're an activist, if you're a reporter who questions him, you see how kind he is real quick. Not kind at all. But if Joe Biden sees you as an equal, a senator, someone that's a millionaire that makes a lot of money, he would. There's no doubt in my mind that he probably is a great guy to them. Like, hey, Bernie Sanders, how your kids doing? Hey, Bernie, let's grab some lunch. So you develop these relationships with these people. So now you're like, oh, Joe Biden was pretty nice to me. I don't want to hit him on corruption as hard. And there was if you guys see online, there was an article that outlined how Nancy Pelosi won the loyalty of Ilhan Omar and the squad. And it was not with money. Like, Ilhan Omar started taking it easy on Pelosi because she was doing like follow-up calls on her. She would call Ilhan Omar and be like, hey, Ilhan, how you doing? Hey, Ilhan, how the kids are doing? Like, they got to know each other, and then like, oh, they're not too bad. You guys see what I'm talking about? That's the different level of corruption. So when I say the squad been corrupted by the Democratic Party, I'm not saying they're Kristen Sinema. I'm not saying they're Joe Manchin. There's some people that will take that far. Me personally, I don't. I'm just talking about they got to know each other. They got to rub elbows. And once again, I can give you a really real example of that. You had AOC who got to know William Nancy Clay. Because William Nancy Clay was working with her on Green New Deal legislation. Despite the fact that William Nancy Clay is corrupt and he took money from police unions that led him to fight against the Ferguson protesters, which led Cori Bush to run against him in the first place, he is as bad as it gets as a Democratic congressman. And he's exactly why I have all my issue with the Black Congressional Caucus. But AOC didn't endorse Cori Bush over him because they got to know each other on the Green New Deal committee. Mm-hmm. So that's the soft corruption I'm talking about. And that's the corruption that's really real. And we need people that won't fall for that. We need people that will actually call it as it is. So do you think it's accurate when I say Nancy Pelosi is like the most corrupt person in the planet? Because I can't see how anyone on the left can be sympathetic to her at all, right? Based on what I just outlined.
I would certainly say that there's a corruption issue. I don't know if she is the most corrupt person on the planet. And I would, especially when you were talking about the PPP funds, when she's legislating programs that are supposed to go to paycheck protection for small businesses to insulate their, payrolls, and businesses owned by her husband are collecting that money. The San Francisco Chronicle just did an analysis showing how the money all went to the white wealthy areas in the Bay Area and how it didn't reach the Black and brown parts of the Bay Area. I wrote a letter to the editor of the Chronicle, which of course they didn't publish. And the whole point there was, you did this analysis at the level of the census tract. Well, what about the very individual figure of the person who represents our city in Washington, who, there are news reports of her husband's businesses gaining money from this program where the funds dried out before they ever reached the communities that they were intended for. And I don't see how that's very different than Trump, with the Secret Service and putting money in his own pocket. This phenomenon of wealthy people using the government as a resource extraction device. Similarly, she's got a pretty renowned history of insider trading, from Microsoft to Visa to Tesla. And, members of Congress built the insider trading regime to effectively privilege themselves. And, it's fairly routine. But I don't understand why members of Congress are allowed to have a stock portfolio in the first instance. Like, it's a divided loyalty. Why would we allow people to be in a position where they could steer public policy to enrich themselves instead of dealing with the needs of their constituents? In fact, it's interesting that most members of Congress are millionaires, and I would wonder, why is that? I mean, it not only represents the subversion of democracy by capitalism, but every single one of them has their own capital interests. And Congress, you don't swear an oath of office to capital. You swear an oath of office to the Constitution, which starts with "we the people." And there is a vast distinction between those inclinations. When you were talking just now about the dynamic of people making friends and then going softer on their friends, I think what you're observing there is a tension between the short and the long-term time slice. So within a congressional session, you have to work with the people who are there. But if you're dedicated to a movement in between, you should frankly want to change the people who are there to support your movement. Your story about AOC and Cori having to fight through AOC's endorsement to join her in Congress reminds me a lot of our race. Not a single member in the squad has ever uttered my name. with the exception of Corey, who used to do events with us before she got elected. And, you know, I'm grateful for her support then. I do think it's interesting that nobody in office feels entitled to in any way cross the incumbents, especially when, just to be very clear here, Nancy Pelosi endorsed non-incumbents. She endorsed Joe Kennedy to replace Ed Markey, who was the Senate co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. It's like she doesn't follow her own rule, but she expects everybody else to. And she not only not followed her own rule, but she did it to kick both climate justice down the stairs and to prop up a family dynasty. When she was pressed, the reason she said she voted for or endorsed Joe Kennedy is because she knew the Kennedy family. So you have the daughter and matriarch of one family dynasty trying to protect and insulate and promote another one. And the only thing, frankly, that pisses me off more than corporate rule or bipartisan authoritarianism is the idea of inherited office reducing our proud democracy to a feudal aristocracy. Because we're not just talking about families and dynasties, we're talking about wealthy, white, powerful families inheriting political offices. As an immigrant to a country that fought a revolution against the country I came from to come here, I am not down with that by a mile, and no proud American should be. It is an offense to democracy. Just the idea of political dynasties in the abstract. But then when they're wielded by powerful, wealthy people who lord their wealth over the rest of us and contrive federal legislation to fill their own pockets and evade criminal accountability for their actions by punching down and left at Black women in Congress when they speak the truth, I think that's an issue that, you know, we should all recognize our shared stake in. And it's a stake that, frankly, is being driven through the heart of every social movement and low-income communities and the future, ultimately.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. You mentioned insider trading with Nancy Pelosi, and while you was going off, I got the receipts. Let's watch this. I want to get your guys' reactions. Give me 1 second, because I remember Peter Dow tweeted this out a while ago, so I was able to find it. Because the amount of people who knows this, I can only imagine. Like, if you ask the average Democrat, I guarantee you they don't know this. Let me share screen so you guys can see it too. 1 second. So this is a short clip, about 2 minutes. We don't watch the whole thing, and I'm gonna get your guys' reaction because I think it literally sells itself. Let me make sure.
And former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her husband have participated in at least 8 IPOs. One of those came in 2008 from Visa, just as a troublesome piece of legislation that would have hurt credit card companies began making its way through the House. Undisturbed by a potential conflict of interest, the Pelosi's purchased 5,000 shares of Visa at the initial price of $44. 2 days later, it was trading at $64. The credit card legislation never made it to the floor of the House. Congresswoman Pelosi also declined our request for an interview, but agreed to call on us if we attended a news conference.
Madam Leader.
Hold on 1 second. I'm going to fix it for the stream. Give me 1 second, guys.
Do your thing. It's good. I actually hadn't seen all this. This is great.
So I'm going to restart it because I know the screen is black. I haven't, that's just a glitch. So give me 1 second, guys. I'll fix it. I know what's going on. I just had to build it again. Yeah, I know the screen is dark, guys. I know it. I'm fixing. It's a glitch. I'm fixing it now.
The frame you froze it on while you're fixing it is just really funny to me because I'm looking at a bunch of congressional staffers or like White House, I guess, or congressional press reporters looking askance at this 60 Minutes reporter who's about to ask her a question to put her on the spot, and they're all giving him the side eye.
Yeah, I see it. So if y'all watching, I fixed it for everyone else. So I'm gonna just start with the clip over so they can see it in full. Good thing I noticed that it was dark for the viewers, but I think I got it fixed. So let's start over.
And former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her husband have participated in at least 8 IPOs. One of those came in 2008 from Visa, just as a troublesome piece of legislation that would have hurt credit card companies began making its way through the House. Undisturbed by a potential conflict of interest, the Pelosi's purchased 5,000 shares of Visa at the initial price of $44. 2 days later, it was trading at $64. The credit card legislation never made it to the floor of the House. Congresswoman Pelosi also declined our request for an interview, but agreed to call on us if we attended a news conference. Madam Leader, I wanted to ask you why you and your husband, back in March of 2008, accepted and participated in a very large IPO.
And as she answered, I'm not going to stop it too much, but I want people to think, because I asked people to do this exercise because I want to dismantle the cognitive dissonance of Trump derangement syndrome. I want you guys to imagine if it was Trump being pressed like this and if Trump responded this way. That's my thing I do whenever Democrats speak. Whether Joe Biden's been pressed, Pelosi, because my whole thing is all the oligarchs are narcissistic maniacs. So Trump is he was just part of that. So I want you guys to keep that in mind, and I'll play the rest of this clip.
Deal from Visa. At a time there was major legislation affecting the credit card companies making its way through the House. And did you consider that to be a conflict of interest?
I don't know what your point is of your question. Is there some point that you want to make with that?
The little point he just made.
I guess what I'm asking is, do you think it's all right for a speaker to accept a very preferential and favorable stock deal?
Well, we didn't.
And you participated in the IPO.
Well, I have many
and at the time you were Speaker of the House. You don't think it was a conflict of interest or had the appearance of a conflict of interest?
It only has the appearance if you decide that you're going to have elaborate on a false premise. But it's not true, and that's that.
I don't understand what part's not true.
Yes, sir. That I would act upon an investment. Yes,
Congresswoman Pelosi pointed out that the tough credit card legislation eventually passed, but it was 2 years later and was initiated in the Senate.
I will hold my record in terms of fighting the credit card companies as a Speaker of the House or as a member of Congress up against anyone's.
That's the Democratic Party rehearsed line whenever they are pushed on tough questions. It doesn't have to make sense. I'll let you guys know. Like when Kamala Harris is questioned on her background of being pro-cop, her response is, I'll put my record on criminal justice against anyone. Joe Biden asked about history. I'll put my record on civil rights. If you listen enough, this is a common tactic they use whenever they ask a tough question. But you guys know it's like, that's the same kind of reaction that Trump would have. He would just deny, attack the person who's asking the question. It's the same thing that they always do. So it's very funny that she had no substantive reply to that. I just want you guys' reaction to that. I always thought that was funny. And that pretty much highlights what you said earlier. That's Nancy Pelosi insider trading. Nancy Pelosi corruption.
Well, I just want to say, like, Nancy Pelosi is one of the most unpopular politicians in America. So the only reason why she continuously wins Speaker of the House is because of the Democratic establishment, not because anybody in America really genuinely believes that she represents any of their values or anything like that. And, outside of, Shahid, is it Shahid or Shahid?
Shahid, yeah. Appreciate you asking.
Yeah. Okay. So outside of Shahid, no one's really been primarying her. She's been kind of sitting comfortably up in her seat. So, like, she doesn't have to be a good politician. Like, she doesn't have to tell the truth. And at the end of the day, like, she knows that, most American voters are low information voters. She also knows that most American voters are not, politics is very inaccessible and elitist. So a lot of the political language that you hear on CNN and all those other places, a lot of people can't really, unless you have like a college degree, it's not really meant for you. It's like, let's just be very real. Let's be very clear. So because she knows that she can get away with just being like, well, put me up against Republicans, because who the fuck knows how to actually look that shit up? Like, I know how to look it up. I'm sure you two know how to look it up. But does the average American voter know how to look up the voting records of the Congress people? No, because politics is largely inaccessible. And, and because of that, opacity of politics and the things and the way things work, that's the reason why Nancy Pelosi is allowed to get away with the things that she's allowed to do. I did want to just, sneak this little story in real quick, Shahid, just because, I've been a fan. But yeah, I met her last year at the Capitol when we were doing the Capitol protest. Remember, I told her, I was like, are you actually going to protect Black people, or are we going to donate to Shahid Buttar and primary you and get you unseated? Like, what do you want to do?
You asked her about that?
Yes, and she just
no journalist ever has what she said.
Thank you for everything, and she just walked past me. I was like, no, you didn't. And then I got on the megaphone and I said it again. I said, no, we will primary you. Like, I'm not joking. I hope somebody has it on video. So if anybody has video for me protesting at the Capitol, I think it was on June.
I want to see that so bad.
I want to see it because, to my knowledge,
please find it.
Please find it. I just want to be clear. I've never heard anyone ask her about me. As the only child, no reporters ever asked her about me.
They're not allowed.
She's never said.
I definitely asked her.
She's never said my name, and she's never debated an opponent in 34 years. So when you talk about her being an unpopular politician across the country, the way she finds her way back to Washington is by ducking debates.
Literally.
And no one in the press has the independence to hold her accountable or to point out, for instance, when she's punching down the left at Ilhan to try to keep herself out of prison, or taking paycheck protection money and putting it in her family's pocket, or legislating Trump's corporate trade deals on the same day she impeached him, or expanding his surveillance powers after having impeached him, or funding his concentration camps, or I could go on. The policies are just nowhere to be seen because journalists, I don't want to say they don't show up for work, because I think many journalists do, frankly, very important work. And I see a lot of corporate editors editing out the most important stories and keeping them from being written. And that's true from the New York Times to the Washington Post. I mean, I talk a lot about the New York Times swinging the 2004 election for Bush by an editorial decision to silence a whistleblower, Mark Klein, who was here in San Francisco, revealing basically the early precursors to what Edward Snowden revealed 8 years later. And the Times decided not to print it because they said they didn't want to swing the election, which just begs the question, what is the point of having journalism in the first damn place if you're not going to inform people? And too many editors just don't bother informing people. I think I mentioned, I did 2 interviews today, so I can't remember if it was this one or the earlier one, where I talked about, Oakland just defunded or, started to defund its police department and shifted $18 million. The San Francisco Chronicle runs a hit piece on the front page above the fold, giving the Oakland police chief the megaphone to punch back today. And it's like, really? Are you serious? In this moment, this is what your editors are inclined to do? And so I see her path to Congress paved by a supine press, stenographers, ultimately, who are not doing the work. And
they worship these media reporters, these partisan reporters. They see it as their job to be stewards and defenders of the Democratic Party. So they can't challenge their Nancy Pelosi or Democrats, because that would be them acting out of their partisan lines. And this is why our media is in such a horrific position it is right now. Because if you're a media person, you caught criticizing Nancy Pelosi, like, oh, you must be a Trump supporter or something. So I feel like they feel obligated to support power. Could that help their career? Because this drive me crazy. I can't stand partisan politics, because I was screaming at the same time, because I remember during the Georgia Senate race, we had David Ossoff, he was going against David Perdue. Mm-hmm. And it was trending on Twitter. They was calling out David Perdue for not debating Ossoff. But then if you click the story, the liberals didn't bring this up, and I am for another debate, but they didn't bring up the fact that David Ossoff debated David Perdue before. So the liberal class, the propaganda class, they was upset because David Perdue went off him a rematch now that there's more media attention on the race. But he already debated him. Where was those same people? Where was those same people when it came to the fact that Nancy Pelosi didn't debate you? That's
sitting on their partisan hands.
That's the partisan politics that drive me crazy. I mean, everyone was talking about the white millionaires that I didn't like. The Sam Cedar, they were like, Sam Cedar got to debate Crowder. Like, what would you guys win? Nancy Pelosi.
That is not important.
Yeah, that's not important.
That is not important.
Right.
And it's crazy because Nancy Pelosi ran on Medicare for all, way back when she ran on universal health care. She ran on universal health care. She was AOC. She was super progressive. She was that woman that was out there, marching in the gay pride parades when it was super uncool to do that shit. So it's just if we can see Nancy Pelosi become one of the literally worst politicians, worst people on the planet, biggest war criminals who literally deserves to be in jail for not only insider trading, but for her very big and complicit role in the lies and the war crimes that happened in Iraq. She used to be someone who was progressive. So why do we not expect our progressive politicians now to get corrupted by these same systems, especially for not actively dismantling them, especially for not actively fighting to dismantle them? So it's just when I look at how the squad right now was watching the Overton window literally get pulled to the right so rapidly, and they're doing absolutely nothing about it. It just reminds me, like, damn, like, this is that beltway pressure they're always talking about. Like, this is what it looks like when people are too afraid to lose their power to actually do anything.
Let me ask you this, Shahid, because I think this is a good time to talk about this. Because honestly, and I think for good reason, many people on the left have been turned off on electoral politics. I put a lot of investment. I mean, I literally quit my job to work on the Bernie campaign. I mean, the people put, like, there's working class people who donated hard-fought money that could have gone to their kids to help get these people elected. So if you're sympathetic to, like, AOC, the Squad, and Jamal Bowman, Ilhan Omar, Cori Bush, and it hurts your feelings to hear us, like, criticize them, I want you guys to realize that these people was paid by us. So you can't get mad at someone for being disappointed in a politician. It's upon the politician to keep people's enthusiasm up on electoral politics. And honestly, the reason why you haven't seen a ton of leftists, and luckily Nina doesn't need it because she's doing really well in that race on her. But a lot of leftists, like, they're not really, like, jumping to support that race because they're like, oh, we've been there down that road before. So my place is, instead of tone policing those people, it's on the ruling class, it's on the politicians to get people into electoral politics. So that's why my question is to you, Shahid, because I want to ask you, how do you convince someone who has been turned off electoral politics over the last few years to get excited about electoral politics, and what will be any different strategy that you have compared to other progressive politicians that would probably win them over, instead of people that, like, I don't want to do this, I'm done with this. Just address that. Like, what will you tell those people? They're like, all right, I'm done with this altogether. Why should people still remain in electoral politics, Shahid?
First reason I would say is just the results. When I look at our campaign last year, we weren't successful in liberating a seat, but we flipped the incumbent on 6 different issues, and bills ended up passing the House of Representatives that Pelosi did not support. The Protecting Right to Organize Act was a generational advance in labor rights. She didn't support it, but it passed the House of Representatives because our campaign held her accountable. Same story on the Justice and Policing Act, and I have a critique of it, especially how it would expand police budgets, but the way it would, for instance, erode qualified immunity, increase data collection to better document the extent of actual profiling that's happening. Those are objectives I've been advocating for 20 years that Pelosi never accepted before. The bill that funded the Postal Service, the War Powers Amendment that stopped a war in Iran. On every one of those issues, without winning a race, our campaign managed to flip the entire House of Representatives. For a while, before I became the target of a character assassination campaign, our campaign was like a tail wagging the dog of the entire House of Representatives. So I've seen things work in the electoral dimension. The second thing I'd say to people who are disillusioned is simply to stay in it for longer. People think that because I'm a candidate, I must be an electoralist. I'm not an electoralist. I have a great disdain for electoral activism. People have been asking me to run for office for 20 years. And I said 20 years ago, the first time somebody asked me, I said, it's a racket. And I don't believe any that it's any less a racket now, but it's a racket that we can actually bend to the service of our communities. I've seen this work. And I've seen this particularly through the lens of someone who came to electoral work after having achieved victories in other spheres. So this past weekend, we celebrated the anniversary of the Obergefell decision that established marriage equality as a national right. Now, I was in court fighting for it in 2004. Nobody then thought it was going to pass. Nobody thought it was likely. Nobody thought it was reasonable. We had the same objections that people had to the defund the police movement. Oh, it's crazy. Oh, you're going to lose the 2004 election. And Democrats were nowhere to be seen. And it's a national right now because we asserted, right? I've helped make impossible things real before. And the essence of it is asserting and asserting thoughtfully in a forum where you have some leverage. And the key in the electoral arena is to approach it with leverage. Now, what we did in our race here was, frankly, mobilize a whole bunch of social movements, because I'm part of the climate justice movement, and I'm part of the movement for healthcare, and I'm part of the movement to defund police. And what was interesting to me is that by the time I got to the election and became the first Democrat in 30 years to face her, the entire movement had been distracted by these tactics out of the Jim Crow South. And I was, it was basically me against her without any organizations that claim to care about those principles. Every climate justice organization, Our Revolution, Brand New Congress, Justice Democrats, Sunrise, you name it, every organization that claims to care about a set of principles abandoned them here in San Francisco. Every labor union endorsed Pelosi in spite of the interests of their rank and file, because organizations are timid when they confront power. And this gets back to the challenge to, in the electoral sphere, address our challenges outside it. In other words, we win elections when we mobilize, and when our organizations sit on their hands, we don't. In other words, if people want Pelosi out of the way, show up. Basically, we had the best shot in 30 years last November. I won more votes against her than anybody has. I'm getting ready to finish the job. We're about a month off of relaunching. If people want Pelosi out of the way, I would just invite them to back her strongest challenger ever. I see so much critique and not nearly enough building. And then when I see these white supremacist tactics mobilized to insulate power from the strongest challenge that she's ever faced, I came away from last year with a much more cynical, much more, frankly, unvarnished impression of the political process. And I recognize that it is a knife fight, and capital will sink to no end of unethical depths to defend itself. But that is what we are talking about. It is a fight between labor and capital, between people and institutions that literally enslave us legally in prisons. And the question is, are we going to show up for the future or not? We did in our race. We saw an impact from it in those 6 different issues that ended up passing the House. And when I look at the squad and what I would do differently when I get there versus the way they've approached the body, most of the members in the squad approached Congress either as people who had local political experience, like Ayanna Pressley, or people who were activists from the ground, like Cori Bush or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I'm neither of those profiles. I've spent 20 years as a national thought leader, an impact litigator, a national profit leader, and a direct action activist. Like, I've done all of the slots. I've been arrested in the Senate for asking questions that nobody wanted to hear. And I've been invited by multiple members of the House to educate them and their aides. I would be entering Congress with a depth of not just expertise and experience beyond those of my colleagues, but an inclination to use it in a very different way. Local politicians get cultivated to do what's popular. That's what politicians do, right? I'm not a politician. I'm like an anti-politician. I've never done what's popular. I've always done what's right. And then because I stand on principle, history has vindicated me. When I fought for marriage equality in the courts to defend my gay neighbors against politicians like Nancy Pelosi who wouldn't support their rights, it wasn't popular, but we won that war. When I fought for campaign finance reform, that actually was popular, and we ended up losing that war. But when I fought Obama from the left, that wasn't popular. All of the liberals, while I was trying to stop Obama's surveillance programs and drone strikes and the immigrant deportation wave that he was continuing from Bush, everyone was like, oh, you're a flaming radical. I had roommates who worked in the administration when I was living in Washington running this nonprofit. We'd have shouting matches on the porch, and it was like, it was intense in those years because a lot of liberals they had their heads in the sand and they were paving the road to authoritarianism because, oh, he's a good Democrat and we're Democrats, aren't we? Yay. And it's like, no, there are principles to be looked at here. I worked for a while for the American Constitution Society. It's an organization that I helped build. And, under the Obama administration, I ended up crossing it to fight one of Obama's nominees, who was the lawyer in the Obama Justice Department who tried to authorize drone strikes targeting U.S. civilians for their speech. And, that's not okay. I am quite willing to challenge Democrats. I mean, I'm only running against the head of the party, right? Like, I'm not afraid of a fight, and I'm not afraid of a principle, even if it hasn't yet become an object of consensus. I don't frankly care what's popular. Popularity has never interested me. I'm just interested in what's right and what's going to keep people alive and what's going to liberate all people and allow them to live their lives free of suffering. That's my interest. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, and I'm so radicalized against the establishment and all the crimes and violence they're complicit with. My mindset is, like, we got to take as many shots as we can. So now my point now, because after investing so much resources in electoral politics, I think like pushing stuff like mutual aid and actually helping people, that's super important. I think that what everyone should kind of advocate for as well. And I know there's some people that like should have like, all right, electoral politics, we're done, and I'm 100% sympathetic to that. But once again, where I come from, we should take all our shots. And I see the value of an inside-outside game. Now, if you're someone who don't have the resources to get electoral politics, like, honestly, you're in California, I'm in Missouri. Like, if I can't donate to that campaign locally, that makes sense because, I mean, how much stock do we want to put into electoral politics? But at the same time, there is a value to be had in a good inside-outside game. And the problem is the people who advocate for the inside-outside game, the inside game is not showing up. because the outside game in America is strong. Look at last year, George Floyd protest. The outside game is ready. We've been ready. I'm not talking about even recent time. Look at Standing Rock. Look at Occupy Wall Street. Look at the anti-war movements during the George Bush administration. The outside game in America always been strong. The problem is we have no inside game. So when you have when you have people organizing Medicare for All marches, when you have people protesting police violence, there should be people in Congress there with them. Because why not? We have Finney in Rome doing mutual aid groups. Why are there not politicians there? You know what I mean? To promote that. So I understand why people are like, all right, we can't promote politicians at all. And I agree with people on a little bit on that, because we can't support the politicians as we know them. And honestly, I include the squad in that, because there's no reason why we can't have politicians who are like, all right, I'm part of the inside game. Let's organize a general strike. Let's stand up for on Julian Assange, which for some reason the squad don't talk about. Bernie Sanders, they don't talk about.
Mike Gravel did. Mike Gravel did. In one era, he was the person who would have stood with Assange.
You talk about Assange right too all the time, Shahid.
He did. He talked about Ellsberg. Yeah, absolutely. I talked about Assange.
I assume right. That's something that's important.
Just to be clear, the prosecution of Julian Assange is a frontal assault on the Constitution and democracy, because if publishers can't publish government secrets without fear of being subjected to prosecution as spies, none of us are ever going to know anything. And whatever the CIA is doing in Brazil and Bolivia and Venezuela and the Philippines, we're never going to find out. We don't even know the worst crimes of our government under the last administration. If anybody wants to find them out, we have to defend the rights of publishers. What is particularly pisses me off about this is that you cannot find a journalist in the United States to observe their own damn interests. They're all on the hook. It's journalists' interests at stake here, and they abandon their own profession, not to mention the public's right to know and the opportunity for us to have a meaningful democracy. If I may, on that point that you were just on, though, about the squad.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you were mentioning the social movements over the last 20 years, I was kind of gritting to myself, because I was part of the anti-war movement under Bush and the immigrant rights movement under Bush and Occupy Wall Street and the Ferguson uprising. Like, I came from those movements to knock out a crux of the establishment so that we would have more inside power. And when people dismiss entire sectors like electoralism or direct action, none of the things are the magic bullet. There is no silver bullet. The whole point is that you have to do it all. Right. It's like electoralism, voting, everything relating to elections is like the ninth inning of a baseball game. They only work if you play the first 8 innings first. But we've already played the first 8 innings, to your point. We have a bipartisan national consensus favoring universal health care. We, the people, have spoken. Now it's Congress's job to effectuate that cultural consensus into policy. But so that's an area where electoralism, frankly, really, really matters, because we've done the preceding work. We've done the advocacy, we've done the tabling, we've done the social media, we've done the campaigning. Now we need to flip some seats. And it's not red seats. They're blue seats, because any blue is not the same. Any blue will do is what leads you to Joe Biden bombing Syria and Iran, absent congressional authorization. And it's no better when he does it than when Trump did. When Trump was threatening to do it. In fact, it's worse, because Trump didn't get to this point.
Wait till Shahid come back.
Did I freeze again?
Yeah, just a little bit, not too long.
It's killing me, man. My internet.
Yeah, it's all good. I want to get Finney. You got any thoughts on this topic?
Please.
Yeah, I feel like I still have some inkling of faith in like electoral politics. Like before all of this activism stuff, like I was a political science major and I thought I was gonna be a policy advisor and just change it all from the inside. Like that's how I thought before this.
Yo, go back to that. I might need staff in DC. Stick around. Go on.
Yeah. Anyway.
Seriously, I can't hire anybody from the party. I think about this. Like I can't trust anyone.
There we go.
They're all censored. I'm looking for you.
but like how do we start to get serious about building collective power and then keeping our promises while in the halls of Congress? Like my thing is, it's just like there should never be a moment that you waver on your principles. especially when your principles are rooted in humanity, especially when your principles are rooted in compassion and rooted in the liberation of other people. Like Medicare for all is a liberatory politic. Canceling student loan debt is a liberatory politic. Like these are liberatory politics that not only help Black people, but they also help, you know, other marginalized groups and working class people of all, you know, race or whatever. So when we talk about building collective power, it's very hard to build collective power when y'all don't actually hold up your end of the bargain and don't actually fight back the way you're supposed to. It's like honestly ridiculous to me that, you know, I'm out here actively feeding people, out here trying to, you know, figure out different ways and different strategies to make these policies politically popular. But we have politicians who ran on these things, who live here, who are not also advocating for these same things. Like we all know that this national change is going to come from local pressure. Like we have to change like we have to like have our leaders care about these local things just as much as they care about, you know, ma'am, please. I'm sorry, my kitten is going crazy.
I like that you call her ma'am.
We have to care about, you know, making voting accessible. Like voting should be a national holiday, and we should scream that to the fucking rooftops every day, because working class people deserve to vote and get their voices heard. And we should push for ranked choice voting, because at the end of the day, there should be no fucking universe in which people are literally forced to run as a Democrat or a fucking Republican, especially when I do not agree with either party because they're a corporate oligarchy. Like I would much rather run as, you know, a Black radical. I'd much rather run as a Green Party, run or whatever. Like run as anything but a fucking Democrat, so I could at least have a political tag that more closely fits my principles and what I need for my life. And it's not to say that, you know, the other side doesn't deserve representation. I'm sure if we go to ranked choice voting, that there will be people on the other side of the spectrum that will get some form of representation that I might not agree with all the time. But that's what a fucking democracy actually looks like. That is what we're fighting for, the freedom of thought, the freedom of choice. And so when we are, you know, actively supporting things like, you know, journalism that isn't free, that isn't allowed to actually hold our government accountable. Like think about if, you know, they were punishing whistleblowers during Watergate. Like without that, we would not have been able to blow that whole scandal open. And so we need to know what our fucking tax dollars are funding. Like if my tax dollars are funding domestic terrorism and fucking oppression domestically and across the globe, then I deserve to know that. The American people deserve to know that. And it's just very disappointing, because I feel like a lot of these politicians get to these spaces where they can have these brave conversations, where we can have these conversations about where we actually are as a country, being a white supremacist, imperialistic, settler, colonial ass fucking country that doesn't actually care about marginalized people. Like we need to admit that out loud so we can grow and transform and actually start to govern from a place of compassion. Because the more we shield these things, the more we pretend like they're not happening, that's when we end up in this fucking microcosm of endless, like, you know, infighting that goes nowhere. No matter, like Nancy Pelosi said, put her record up against anybody's, she's not going to look that different. Everybody else that's here is doing the same shit. 50% of Congress is fucking millionaires and billionaires. So of course, they're going to sit up here and fucking support millionaires and billionaires. Of course, they're going to cut their corporate buddies' checks, because that's what they understand. That's their life experience. And that's why it's important for people like us to be representatives, to hold these seats, because we have life experiences that are actually going to give us some sense of urgency about what real safety looks like, about what real structural change looks like, and what it looks like for a government to actually materially make the lives of its citizens better. Not performatively, not in some fucking bullshit ass way that can be repealed in 4 years, but like in a structural, sustainable way that cannot be overturned, that is not based on red team, blue team, that is genuinely based in compassion and care for its citizens, but especially the most marginalized among us, like Black and Indigenous people.
Well said. As always, the Finny. you got the chat on fire. But anyway, I want to share this. Like, this is honestly one of my favorite Pelosi videos, and we got to cover this before we end it. I appreciate you sticking with us, Shahid. Like I said, we can go all day on this, but I at least had to show this video because they're probably my favorite Pelosi video of all time, and this is why I will love to see her in a debate with you. And it will probably be a bloodbath the likes the political world have never seen. If something like that ever happened.
She wants to put her record up against somebody. I'm happy to put her up against mine. Like, she could show up for a debate. That would be great.
Her advisors don't want that debate for good reason, because look how she folds under pressure. I shared this video on my channel before. We got a decent amount of viewers here that are gonna see this for the first time. I'm gonna share it so you guys can see it. But what I believe, then my friend Savion, he posted this a while ago. I didn't know if you saw this or not. But this is one of my video. Yeah. We don't watch it again because it's great. This is probably my favorite Pelosi video, and this is what all politicians, especially people like Pelosi, this is the kind of pressure they should be facing all the time, like all the time, because what the state violence that they are complicit in funding is unforgivable. It's deeply immoral. Like Nancy Pelosi is complicit with the ICE slave labor camps. She continued to fund DHS more and more and more. ICE just increased the budget under Joe Biden when they were caught using slave labor, forfeiting people, sexually assaulting migrants. So this is a scorn that in any country that is actively reporting on what politicians are doing, they should be facing all the time. So the reason I bring this up because like look how she handles this, and imagine her if she had to handle someone like Shahid calling her out on her corruption. So I know you've seen this video before, but it's classic, so we gotta watch it again. So let's check this out.
Yeah.
Hey.
I love that guy, by the way.
Okay, you've asked some questions. Okay. I totally agree with you. But as we fight the fight for the Dreamers, which is our... Do you want to listen or do you just want to shout? Yeah, I got it. As we fight the fight, it's clear you don't want any answers. Just stop it now.
They don't hear your bullshit.
Just stop it now. Let's stop it now. Look,
like she's literally shaking. Like she literally can't handle this kind of public pressure. Once again, all politicians be facing this pressure all the time. I even said that press secretary shouldn't exist. Like I don't think the politicians are too busy where they can't answer the press for at least an hour a week to explain what's going on with your decisions. Anyway, I let the thing finish. But one thing I want to highlight is I want her to see, like, she's shaking. Like, she's clearly nervous. She's not used to people pushing back on her at all. The reason why I want to dig up the clip was because you mentioned, Shahid, how, like, no one even asked Pelosi about you. Like, Pelosi never even asked about the insider trading. She never asked about her being complicit with funding DHS, her war crimes. This is how she will handle it if she was asked these. I rewinded just a few, and I let the rest of the video play, and I'll get your guys' thoughts, and we wrap up after that.
now, let's stop it now. Stop it. Look, I want to tell you something.
Yes, no.
Why do we do this? Since you don't want to listen, we'll have to just go.
Since you guys won't buy into the bullshit that I'm feeding you, I'm gonna rage quit. That's essentially what she was saying there. And she tried to feed them bullshit. They corrected her multiple times, and she was like, "Okay, since you won't listen to the bullshit I'm spewing, you guys are not allowed to voice your concerns at the politician that you pay." I just want to get your guys' general take on that video. I got a lot to say because I think it speaks volumes. It's probably one of my favorite videos. Shahid, what's your thoughts when you saw that?
That's the attitude of a wealthy matriarch of a political dynasty who doesn't like being questioned. And the fact of the matter is we live in a democracy where we're supposed to be asking questions. We, the people, run this show. It's supposed to be a government for, of, and by us with a capital U, not the wealthy. complicity, the bipartisan complicity of the erosion of our, damn it.
Yeah, you cut out just a little bit. Just repeat what you just said, just for the last few seconds. It's cool.
Thank you. The bipartisan complicity in the erosion of our rights, in Wall Street taking over and fleecing America, whether it was the 2008 recession and the bailouts that we, the people, never got, or whether in every successive era, we find billionaires just making more and more money, and people like Nancy Pelosi getting more and more wealthy while the rest of America is left behind. You know, there is a lot, not just here in San Francisco, but around the country. There are a lot of people who are struggling with housing insecurity in the middle of a pandemic, people who are trying to like sleep at night because, you know, their elders or their loved ones, their kids might be sick and they can't get the care they need or the medicine they need. There are people who are dealing with their family members being deployed abroad because they signed up to defend our country and instead they're being sent abroad to defend Wall Street. And every single one of these examples represent the abdication of responsibilities that our elected leaders owe to us. And, you know, I'm not somebody who's here to fill my pocket. You know, I've walked away from money multiple times. I'm on the heels of having just won more votes against this very powerful plutocrat than anyone ever has before. And I did that in spite of some pretty profound headwinds. I'm eager to finish the job because I would like, frankly, for us to have a Green New Deal. And I'd like us to have universal health care. And I'd like us to have non-predatory alternatives to police that actually keep us safe. And as long as her, in particular, Nancy Pelosi, remains in Washington, or alternatively, if they run her daughter to replace her, which is two different outlets have suggested that might happen, we can't have any hope of the future's needs being met. And, you know, I'm not running for office because it's like a fun thing. You know, I got bloodied by this. It's vicious. It is hateful. It is brutal. I would frankly not recommend it to anyone. And, you know, I happen to have done the work over the last 20 years to dismantle her coalition if journalists show up for work ultimately. And, you know, I'm going to spend the next year encouraging journalists to do the work that so many of them have found themselves unable to do over the last however long. But I just want to double underscore, just to get down to brass tacks, I'm relaunching in about a month. I have a deadline at the end of June when we're disclosing to the government and the press what kind of support we have. At one point, I feared that our results at the end of June might be seized upon by my critics to suggest that I am in fact dead in the water after their attempt to character assassinate me last year. I don't fear that anymore just because we have picked up a lot of support, but just to make it really explicit, if you want to see Nancy Pelosi out of office, I would really invite any of your listeners to join us at whatever level might be comfortable for you. Our average contribution last year was $21. So, you know, I don't want anybody to put themselves out of work or quit your job, for instance, the way you did for Bernie. Like, you know, nobody has to go to that depth, but, you know, I've dedicated 4 years of my life and I'm in it for the next year and a half and can't do it alone. Would love your support. You can find us at shahidforchange.us. And super grateful to you, Nick, for bringing me on, and Afeni for all your work and your voice. Super powerful voice. Really glad to hear it.
Yeah, I had the you guys didn't see it, I didn't share it to you guys, but I had it for the audience. Your website. So if you guys want to support the campaign, go. It was Shahid for us. Sorry, I don't want to get it right. Shahid for change. Shahid for change.us. For all the issues there. And once again, we can go all day on this, but we appreciate you coming on. And once again, the reason why I want to talk to you, because I mean you are willing to talk about stuff like the CIA. You're willing to stand up for Julian Assange, and there's not progressive politicians that are doing that. And my thing has always been, and I think this is a good wrap up point, is I have a lot of respect for what Bernie Sanders has started. I don't like the direction he's going now. I talk about that on my show all the time, but I still give him credit for starting this movement. But the left, what we need to do right now is we need to stop being stuck in the past. Like, if people look at Bernie Sanders, that's not the sign of what the Overton window should be. Like, I doubled down when Bernie Sanders dropped out. I shifted further to the left. There are a lot of people who kind of became more moderate when Bernie lost. But I went the exact opposite way. Like, Bernie literally had to be, like, he's a compromise. That's the best way. We got to double down, and we got to actually speak on, like, issues of the freedom of press, Julian Assange. We got to speak on issues of state violence. Bernie was one of the people that was hesitant to say he was supportive of defunding police. We can't have none of that. We can't have a squad of progressives that are complicit with funding the police more. We need a left that is willing to shift and focus more on foreign policy, more on actual human rights that are being stolen from us, the freedom of press being one of them, the Fourth Amendment crackdowns that we see all the time. We didn't even... Like, we can talk about all that. We didn't even get into that issue. I wanted to talk about it, but maybe next time. But it's like, there are a lot of issues that the left haven't focused on that we need to focus on moving forward. And that's why I hope I see it from you. That's why I see for the most part that we brought you on. I'm looking forward to seeing that more in the future. Anything else that you want to plug and promote, Finney, before we sign off?
Well, like I said,
or any last word, anything you want to send off the audience with?
I mean, I just wanted to say, like, when I watched that video of Nancy Pelosi, I just see like privilege, like so much privilege. Yeah. So if you see that and you're kind of disgusted and you're a white leftist, just know that that's how a lot of black leftists are looking at you.
That is a great, that's probably the best way to end this. That's
like,
great.
Honestly, like that same level of privilege, that same level of just like, you know, like that fear of real conflict and of debate, that fear of actually being held accountable. That is exactly how we look at you. Because at the end of the day, all of these movements, all these politicians, they need to really realize that our lives depend on this shit. And that's the reason why we're so aggressive. That's the reason why we're so urgent. It's not because we're being dramatic. It's not because these things are impossible. Abolition is not impossible, but it is unimaginable. So it takes every single one of us to create and imagine that world. And a lot of the times people think about safety, they do not think about armed police. 73% of white people don't even have contact with the police during a year. And the other 30%, the only reason why they do is because they initiated it themselves. So when we have these conversations, when we're holding our politicians accountable, these are the fucking conversations we want to have. These are the points that we want made. It is not some fucking bullshit debate about who's more privileged than who or who has more clout than this. Because at the end of the day, that is not getting me free. That's not getting my people free. That's not getting me health care. That's not getting me a proper education. That is not unsaddling all these black women that hold the most student loan debt out of any demographic group. That is not unsaddling them from that debt. So fight for the shit that we need you to fight for. Actually focus, put your eyes on the prize, and the prize is liberation. The prize is equity. The prize is compassion and community. The prize is not trying to become a cub of Mama Bear. Let that shit go. We don't agree. And it is okay to disagree. But it is not okay for children to starve in the richest country in the world. It is not okay for hundreds of thousands of people to be unhoused. We have more than enough fucking houses. And it's not okay. It is not okay for any black person to feel unsafe in a country that our ancestors built for free on our backs, period. So like white leftists, this is the conversations we want to have. I want to have conversations about, you know, the fascistic tendencies of the Democratic Party and when they're cracking down on our freedoms. We want to talk about that. We don't want to, like, I'm tired of being distracted because you distracting us from our fucking movement is literally getting my people killed. It is getting other people killed. It is getting other countries destroyed and governments disrupted with your ignorance and your complacency. So like, we have to hold each other accountable. If we truly love each other radically, if we have radical empathy, we have to hold each other accountable to what this movement is actually supposed to be. So like, Shahid, like, I very much appreciate you for everything that you are. I appreciate your bravery because that's what this shit takes. It takes people willing to sacrifice, you know, their comfortability for the humanity of others, because our comfortability is a lot of people suffering all over the world and especially in this country. So, you know, I don't really have anything to plug. Follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter, you know, at Red Azari with 2 Ds. And my podcast is coming. And Shahid, I would love to talk to you about reparations.
I'd be amped.
Really, like, I'm
I've
big
got a vision
on
for it. I'd love to talk to you about it.
So.
Yes, please. I'm so grateful to hear your voice. I'm just like,
yeah,
I just followed you since we started talking.
Like, if anyone would do that, get you hyped up when she speaks. I'm like, God damn, that was a good point. I wish I would made that one. But
I mean, you and I are both like waving our arms in the air.
Oh.
No, seriously, like, thank you. Like, I appreciate truly sharing space with you and, like, you know, you sharing like your story with us, because this shit isn't easy. And like, I love you so radically. I don't even know you like that, but like, just you doing this fighting in the way that you have, like, it's super important and we will win. Like, we're already like starting to change the tide. So we're winning, period.
Right on. Right on.
Well,
right on. Absolutely.
And I want to thank everyone for watching. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I want to thank Shahid for coming on. This is what we are about at Hampton Leftists. We don't focus on like clickbaity distractions, you know what I mean? Like, we want to talk about hardcore substantive issues in these free-flowing conversation ways. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We do upload every day, and we actually have another special panel in about 1 hour. You're going to have the women of Fred Hampton Leftists. We're going to get together, and they're going to talk about, I assume like misogyny, a lot of stuff. They said, I'm going to pull it up for Savvy. Discussing intersectionality, black women on the left. You're going to have Jackie, you're gonna have Sabrina Sabs, Courtney Banks is gonna be on there as well. I'm trying to see what I'm trying to get in the other one. Gloria Jones on Twitter as well. I'm not too familiar with her, but it's gonna be a great panel, all female panel in just an hour. That's 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you're watching the stream, stay tuned because Sabrina's gonna be live in an hour. And we do upload every day. We had about a 3-hour stream today. Tomorrow, Straight Out Compton will be on Wednesday. And Thursday is the big day where we had the Fred Hampton Leftists podcast. All the hosts will be there. Friday, Revolutionary Jargon. Saturday, me and Ari are going to get together. We're going to discuss some more theory and maybe more foreign policy segment that we're going to be doing on Saturdays. Sunday, JB Font on the JB Show has been holding it down. On Monday, you get Nerdologics with Jackie and Meg, where they take movies, pop culture, and tie that into the struggle and politics. Great show. Then today, Thursday, that's my show. So that's what we got today. So the point is we upload every day. So please support us. It's going to be hard to beat the algorithm. They don't boost our content. So we have grown the way we have thus far because of word of mouth, right? So we appreciate everyone for sharing it. Share it with a friend if you enjoyed it. And check out our future uploads. Thank you for coming on, Shahid. Thank you, Ari, for staying in with me. Finney, sorry, for staying with me. This is Fred Hampton Leftists. We're signing out. Thanks, guys.
Peace, y'all.